the very first prototype from Medarot 8 that would later evolve into what we know now as Death Providence. It is WEA-03P1 Shisaku1, with a kit of Charge Buster, Press, Power Rifle, Tank Legs, and the leg ability of Barrier, which grants the guard boost effect itself when charging Metaforce. Now, as the first prototype that essentially shaped what would be a new change-up in standard weapon type kit and arsenals, Shisaku1 certainly set the trend that the later prototypes and later Death Providence himself would end up following, as a very powerful tank-based and heavy artillery-based shooter type. Charge Buster is a conventional shooting skill with a Metaforce-reliant damage bonus to it, which means that upon use, it will consume a small amount of Metaforce, 10% at low level, 10% of your charge at anything under 5-star, and when capped, of course, only 5%. But upon consuming that Metaforce, you will also get a damage bonus relative to a certain threshold of your Metaforce charge being used. So that means you can add additional bonus damage on top of that for having a almost full or very full gauge. Press is a gravity attribute skill that is good, and as a gravity attribute skill means it's great for one thing especially, heavy punish. So that means any opponents that are using 2 or more heavy parts will be absolutely feeling the pain from this particular cannon, but if they are only using 1 or none, will be moderately lower on the lower end or mediocre end of the spectrum. Left Armor Power Rifle is also a conventional shooting skill that will get a times 1.5 damage bonus as long as the user's legs are intact when attacking, of course at the cost of a cooldown penalty of no dodge and no defend. However, this particular tank-based artillery type actually takes his well-rounded kit pretty well accounted for, and it has some pretty solid synergy within itself if used correctly. Given that he has tank legs also means that Shisaku1 will have a very solid coverage on all terrains with no real drawback or weakness, or advantage really for that matter, but he does get a passive damage reduction because he is a tank-based model. And if he chooses to charge Metaforce on one of his turns, his damage reduction actually goes up even higher. Now, with his kit as a whole, like I mentioned, it does synergize with itself moderately well, given that he could alternate between Press and Power Rifle pretty well, and then maybe use Charge Buster after 3 or 4 turns to maybe use as a finish skill or a nuke skill once he has enough of a charge filled. That being said, naturally, going for a Hunter or Sniper Nature Medal might be the best course of action for this particular model to best capitalize on this strategy. However, it is also worth noting that as the first and earliest prototype that would later become Death Providence, Shisaku1 also packs the weakest stats of all the prototypes and of course the final product. So even though he is very easily obtained as a friend point gacha model, he's honestly someone that you'll use if you're still really early in the game, but once you start getting some higher end parts, you're going to be replacing them very quickly and very easily. That being said, however, as a pure set score, I do have to rate Shisaku1 a pretty solid 5 out of 10 across the board. Even if speed or mobility may not be his strong suit, and as a artillery type that really isn't something that he wants to focus on anyway, to early game players and rookies, he can be very invaluable as someone you can get very early on, and as someone who could probably carry you through a good chunk of early content while you're still collecting parts. As mixed parts, I do have to rate him just a little bit higher at a 6.5 out of 10, given that even though with tank legs that may hold you back a pretty fair amount, especially in early game, his mixed parts actually still do have some pretty viable use, even if he is the weakest of the 4, including the final product. Power Rifle, of course, you really can't go wrong with using anywhere. Press and Charge Buster, same case. It is, however, also worth mentioning that all of his parts are heavy, and his legs as tank naturally have a heavy limit of 3, meaning that while he can dish out the heavy punish with Press, he also is equally susceptible to such.